Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Diversity Cafe. It's so great to have you back. I'm Angela Hood. I'm the CEO and founder of This Way Global, and we love to give you insight from behind the closed curtains, right? We want to help candidates find the right job for them, find a way that they enjoy their life because we spend so much of it at work. What I do is I look out in the ecosystem and I find recruiters that are saying things that I think really need to be shared more broadly. And that is why I have invited Michelle Turner. Thank you so much for joining us. And I
Thanks.
would love for you to tell the world where you are, where do you live, what company do you work for, what do you do?
Absolutely. Well, thanks for having me, Angela. I'm excited to be here. So my name is Michelle Turner, and I'm currently physically located in Virginia Beach. That's where we live. I'm the Vice President of Clinical Talent and Delivery for a company called Hazel Health. And we are on a mission to bring healthcare to every student in the U.S. We use video telemedicine to bring healthcare into K-12 schools. We partner with schools and districts across the country. We were started about 7.5 years ago, initially with a focus on physical healthcare. So using our incredible pediatricians, nurse practitioners, and PAs to bring on-demand healthcare to kids in schools. So if you have pink eye or you have a stomach ache at school, I'm able to, within a couple minutes, be on video with one of our pediatricians right there in the school building. And we've grown since then. We're now able to provide mental health care, which is so important to students, through our awesome team of licensed therapists. And we've expanded to 14 states. So we're serving about 3 million children, bringing healthcare into their schools and also now into their homes.
So 3 million between K and 12.
Yes. Yep. Okay. So 3 million students in the districts that we work with. Yeah.
Okay, that is amazing. I did not understand the K to 12 aspect of Hazel Health. Obviously, I knew the other part, but that is very cool. So the way you and I got to meet each other, I actually don't know. We have some common friends. I don't even remember which ones they are at this point.
I'm not sure either.
Yeah, right. But we're both military spouses. So I talk about it on occasion, but a lot of people don't know this, is that my husband was a Marine Corps fighter pilot, and he was a Lieutenant Colonel of the Marine Corps. And we, spent many years, decades in the Marine Corps. And it is a super challenging time as a spouse to try to build a career and have a family and deal with deployments and all of that. So I would love to get your take on, how is it for you to build your career, and what kind of 2, maybe 3 pieces of advice would you give another military spouse?
Yeah, so great question. So military spouse as well. My husband's prior enlisted Marine. He's now a naval officer. That's actually why we're in Virginia Beach, big military community here. It's where we're currently stationed. But it's been challenging to build a career with as often as we move as military families. I was really vocal about pushing remote work before COVID hit because of that reason. And so earlier on, I got involved with an organization that's now the military spouse arm of Hiring Our Heroes, to really try to help mentor and encourage military spouses on the bases we were living in to network with each other, teaching them how to, access remote careers before COVID made that, it's such a popular thing. But what I try to really encourage spouses who are frustrated with their career path or really just not sure where to start. Number one, the power of networking. And, that can be in person or online. You can't underestimate the power of talking to people about your story, talking to people about what you're looking for from a career standpoint, what you bring to the table, but also the power of really getting your foot into the door. And so I've not always had my dream career. I've had some positions that at the time were, they were the roles that were available to me, and it might have been a good fit for where our family was, or sometimes it was a remote position that allowed me to work in the place where we were living, like Gulfport, Mississippi, which was not not really a career hub, but a place that we lived for 3 years. And, to really take advantage of those door opening positions that give you an opportunity to kind of prove yourself and work your way up. And
Well,
so,
you
yeah.
mentioned something there that as it tied to one of, I follow you on LinkedIn. And so you posted something one day and it was about being very intentional and being very specific around an ask. And I think that this is something that I know I certainly struggled with, is you kind of feel bad that you're having to ask other spouses for help. But I think if you could share that tip that you shared and maybe how a spouse could use that to get a better intro into a job.
Absolutely. So I get a lot of requests on LinkedIn that are often vague or just, asking to meet with me for 15-30 minutes. And I love people. I genuinely would love to meet with probably everybody who asks me that. I just simply don't have time like everybody else. Our schedules are packed. I have several interviews a day. Right now I'm booking interviews over a week out. So I genuinely don't have time to meet with everybody that's interested in a job at our company. So I, as you mentioned, made a post a couple weeks ago stating that the best way for me to help, I know that job searching is hard, the interview process is hard, but the best way for me to be able to help candidates is when they make a really specific ask. And so I gave an example that I'd actually received that same day. An entry-level candidate had messaged me on LinkedIn and said, I've been following your work. I really love it. I applied for this job. You may not be the recruiter for it, but would you mind passing my name on? Done. I was not the recruiter for that job. He actually works for me. I sent the name on. I said, connected with her on LinkedIn. She seems really interested. Please make sure you have at least a phone screen with her. I love to be able to do that. But when I get messages that say, I'm really interested in Hazel Health, I'd love to meet with you for 30 minutes to hear more about it, I have to say no. And I hate doing that, but I just don't have the time. And so military spouses, we have an incredible community between the military spouse and the veteran community. So many entrepreneurs and CEOs and leaders in companies use that on LinkedIn. If you've applied for a position or are interested in a position, use that military network. Don't be afraid to say, hey, I see your fellow military spouse. I applied for this job. I think I'd be a great fit. Do you know who the hiring manager is? Do you mind passing my name on? It's an easy ask. Yep. And almost always is the person going to be willing to help you out in that way.
Yeah. So it really, it kind of put an exclamation point around something that I think people have wrong. So I think candidates believe if they reach out to you and say, I'm really interested in learning about Hazel Health, that they're going to start building a relationship with you. And really, you're not the person they need to build a relationship with. It's someone else.
Yes. Very
and you
true.
don't have the bandwidth for it.
Exactly.
Is the other point. Yeah.
Yes.
So that's the important part. Everyone, if you can just listen to this, we all know in the recruiting world that if you reach out to us, you're trying to get a job. We know that. And there's nothing wrong with that. That's a good thing.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, exactly. And also the thing that I love about having that specific ask is it shows that initiative. It shows that I've done everything I can do at this point. I've researched your company, I've applied for the job, and now I'm trying to go that extra step to get my kind of my name to the top of the list. I'm not going to ask you for 30 minutes to go over the company. Hopefully they've already gone to our website and they've learned really everything they can learn to that point. But making that really clear ask actually makes them a more attractive candidate because it shows they're not afraid to go that extra step and be clear about what they're looking for.
And I do hear from recruiters a lot that they say, if I have, let's say 5 applicants that all sort of are equal, but one is showing the extra initiative, the extra drive to work for us specifically, that they are inclined to push them up higher because they believe that they have a stronger ability to probably bring them into the organization, and that the retention numbers generally show to be better when someone has that kind of intention.
Yes, absolutely. And especially when you make a comment like, I've been following Hazel for a while. I've seen, a lot of times folks will throw in just like a tidbit that they've learned. I saw your white paper that you put out 3 weeks ago and thought it was really interesting. I saw that you've launched in, this district. That's where I grew up. And I love that the kids, that are going to the school that I grew up in now have access to healthcare.
Yeah.
Those are other things that just show, again, it shows that you're doing your research. It shows that you're really genuinely interested and not just throwing resumes out to any job that happens to be open. And then followed by a specific ask makes me, as a recruiter or somebody in talent, really want to help you. And again, do whatever I can to kind of push your name forward for that role.
So I think this also goes to a metric that I think candidates should be considering, and it's called time to hire. So recruiters are measured on the day that the job gets approved and gets launched out into the world, however way that they want to do that. And then they start getting applicants in, and they're also sourcing passive candidates at the same time. And then they're looking at all these people. They've got to get them on, select them first. They've got to get interviews scheduled with those ones that they're interested in. And all of this is counting to the time to hire. Mm-hmm. It's part of the reason why you don't have 20 minutes to talk to anyone, because you're against the clock. And also, too, why someone that's showing real intention gets a recruiter's attention, because you're like, okay, that person could speed up. They may be hired 2 or 3 weeks faster than someone else.
Yeah, absolutely. And the other thing that a lot of times applicants don't see is we have roles where we have 200 to 300 applicants, and your name going to the top of the list might just mean that your resume gets that extra 5 seconds that it otherwise couldn't get, simply, again, because everyone has time limitations. And if you have 300 resumes to review and somebody says, hey, this person already reached out on LinkedIn, they're following our company and they seem to be a good fit, check them out, we can go in and pull the name instead of them just being a resume that we're reviewing after we've already looked at 50 resumes and our eyes are starting to glaze over.
Right. So the glazing over part is called cognitive dissonance. And I always talk about this because we all experience it.
Yes. Yes.
So the candidate experiences when they go on and they're looking at this long list of open jobs, and they open one and it's like, okay, that's not the location and it's not remote. I need a remote job. They're going through that in the same way that you're going through. This person look like they're qualified, but they're not. This person, doesn't want to even start work with us until next year, and we need them now. It's like there's always things that people don't realize that causes people to get filtered out. Mm-hmm. One of them that gets brought up a lot that I would love your feedback on is, let's say a person's been in the workforce for 10 and 15 years. So this is not an entry-level person. This is a person that's a little bit more senior. And currently their resume is 2 pages long. Our advice is always to say, get it to 1 page. It's the point of it is it's like a first date. It's like you just want to get the next conversation, and you're more likely to be seen if it's concise, accurate, and brief. But is that the right advice that we should be giving?
Yeah. So I think so. I think the other problem with having a longer resume is it can make you appear to be a job hopper, even if you're not. So if you have somebody who has 22 experience in the work field and you have somebody with 10 years, they both on average stayed at a job for, say, 4 years at a time. The person with 22 years is, if you're looking at their resume, is going to look like they've job hopped more, just because the resume is longer and they have more titles on their resume. And so unless there's a really specific reason why it should be included, and actually I'll give an example. I do all of our therapist hiring. And so because we work in schools, we actually have quite a few therapists who started out as teachers, or maybe even they were teacher assistants or did something in a school building prior to going back to school to become a therapist. And so for us, that's really attractive. You don't have to have been a therapist in a school, but if you have knowledge of how schools function, how they operate, that's a huge plus for us. So, but what I would say is, if it's not in your resume, because maybe it is so far back that you've tried to condense your resume to 1 page and make it really concise, then that's something that you can put in your cover letter if you do have a cover letter. I know it's another kind of topic of
Yep.
non-agreement amongst recruiters, whether cover letters are necessary or not. But I always say a cover letter should not just be a written format of your resume. Tell me something in your cover letter that I cannot learn in your resume. Doesn't have to be long. You don't need it. Same thing. If anything, shorter is better, but include something I cannot learn from your resume.
Yeah, so I always recommend that if someone is a spouse and we do look like we are job hoppers, that's actually one of the really big points of contention is if you're not military, you may not understand this, but when your spouse is going through any type of training or whatever, they may go one place for 6 months, next place for 9 months. Because my husband was training in the wing, we lived 9 places in the first decade. And by 9 places, I don't mean in the same state even. Like we were, Florida and South Carolina and California and Texas and bouncing all over.
Yeah.
Makes you look like a job hopper. Mm-hmm. And so what I always tell people is literally 3 sentences to explain that you are a military spouse, that you're not a job hopper, and just you need to be direct, use direct language because it's like to the point. That's the issue of it. Also, I learned this with consultants. So people that work for a big consultancy, McKinsey, PwC, something like that, they go into engagements and the engagement might be 6 months at one place, 3 months at another place, and they list all of them. So what it looks like is the person only keeps a job for 6 months and 3 months and 9 months.
Right.
And so a better way to cover that is to say kind of high level, like I'm a financial consultant. And then under there, list all the engagements that you've done so that you can get the credit for the companies you've worked with, but so that the resume does not look like exactly what you just described.
Right. Absolutely. And to take it even a step further from the military spouse standpoint, I encourage military spouses to include what the benefit is. People don't understand the military community. So like, for example, for us, because we hire clinicians, there are, there's legislation that helps military spouses get their medical license or their, nurse practitioner license, PA license faster in the state that they're PCSing or moving to. Put that in your cover letter. If you're applying for a role in Hawaii because you're PCSing to Hawaii and you're applying for a physician associate role there, put in your cover letter that because of the Military Spouse Act, my license will be expedited and I should have it in this number of months. Include those things that not only explain sort of, like you said, why your resume isn't as consistent or why you've had more positions than others, but also include why it can be a benefit to the company.
Right. Well, and so I'll tell you what I used to do before I had a tech company is I was a construction engineer and I started working for the contracting officers on the bases as a contractor. Because then I could move around inside of South Div of the Navy and I could be at different bases. And if you were to look at my resume, I could just say I worked as a contracting officer for South Div of Navy. And I could list the places I worked, which were Kingsville and Corpus Christi and different places. And those were different jobs and I had to move. But according to the employment world, I'm still working under the same office and I've stayed the same job and I have career progression inside that.
Right. Exactly. And so I really try to encourage military spouses to think about the portability of their career. That of course has become easier because of COVID. Yes. You don't want to go into a career field for the sole reason of it, being one that's easy to transfer, but it is just the reality of the life that we live. And so thinking about that as you're thinking about, going forward with education or applying for jobs is so important. And that's one of the ways to do it is to find a job that you can actually take from base to base. It's a great way to do it. Yeah.
Not everyone has that ability, but you made a super valid point is with the level of remote careers that are available now that used to not be available, there is so much more ability to transition into a remote job. And it just gives you flexibility, even if you want to go on a vacation and you still want to be able to pick up like some calls that you need to take or whatever. If you have a job that can be done remotely, it's so much easier.
Yeah, so much. And, things like pre-deployment leave, I hear so often from military spouses, I could never work a job because, we want to go see family for 2 weeks in the summer, and we try to get back home before and after deployments. And we've done all of those things. It gets harder. It's more the kids that keep us from being able to travel now than my job, because of their sports and activities and everything else. But that is another really beautiful thing about having a remote or portable career, is we can also do that travel, and I can, not miss work the entire time. I can still work days.
Yep.
While we're in different locations. Absolutely.
Yeah. And I do think that, so this is something I would say that is a huge advantage that military spouses don't call out enough, is that we are agile. I mean, when we were active duty, I was just like, if something turned on a dime, I'm like, no problem. Just, you just go with it. And a lot of people can't do that. And right now, I will tell you from a startup CEO perspective, it's one of the challenges that we have in hiring is being able to find people that can take like a big engagement comes in and you got to pivot, and you got to pivot without hesitation. A lot of people can't do that. And I don't think I've ever seen a military spouse that wasn't able to do that.
Yes. And that's one of the things I really pushed as a startup as well, Hazel. Things are constantly changing. We grow really fast, but priorities will change. Sometimes it feels like from week to week, and that's just startup life. And I know as a military spouse, I've taken so many skills that I've learned from being a military spouse, and I use them at work all the time. That flexibility, tenacity, the scrappiness, all of that you need to function in the military community also goes so well in the startup community. And so there's so many skills that we've learned as military spouses that transfer over really well into the startup community for sure.
Yeah. One thing I'll say that I've been a little bit disappointed in, and this is more of the veteran focus on hiring, is that companies that, there's kind of two things. One is companies that say that they're focused on veteran hiring, but they're not really. Mm-hmm. They're not really intentional about it. They don't make accommodations for service disabled veterans, things like that. That's mm-hmm. number one. And then number two, the ones that say, we are interested in hiring veterans, but not spouses and dependents. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And so sometimes I question, like, do you really understand then the full magnitude of what happens with a family in active duty? And I think that they don't. And it makes me think their approach to veterans is not as strong.
Absolutely. And the other thing that bothers me is when companies act like they're doing a service because they're hiring veterans or military spouses. Yeah. And I want to scream from the rooftops, you are missing out if you are not hiring veterans and military spouses. Yeah. You are missing out on a, extremely well-trained, extremely versatile, flexible, strong, experienced, educated segment of the population that you aren't hiring simply because, one, their jobs don't line up exactly with what your titles are in the corporate environment, or two, you see more than 3 jobs in 5 years and you count them out as a job hopper. Or you say, well, they're going to leave in 2 years anyways. Well, actually, if you look at the data, military spouses have a longer longevity in terms of staying with companies than their civilian counterparts. So that idea that I'm not going to hire them because they're going to leave in 2 or 3 years anyways, you can hire their neighbor and they're going to probably be gone first. So you're doing yourself a favor actually by hiring a military spouse. And then if you can find a way to be flexible and let them take that job with them, you'll have an employee for a whole lot longer. I can promise you that, because we're also a very loyal group.
That's exactly the point I was about to make. Yeah, there is a loyalty thing about us that sometimes I think is a fault. I mean, we sometimes, I think I've seen people stay at employers that maybe wasn't a perfect scenario for them. They could have done a better job at a different company. But because of the loyalty side of us as kind of natural part of our personalities, we tend to say, no, they gave me the opportunity. I'm staying with them. I'm going to figure it out.
Yes. Yes. I think you're exactly right. And I think some of it is that, historical experience of I might not be able to get another job. Somebody else may not hire me because because they're going to find out I'm a military spouse and I'm going to move. So I've got to hang on to this one for as long as I can, even if I've outgrown it or it's really not the best fit for me anymore.
Yeah. How much? So I think some of this applies to just everyone, right?
Mm-hmm.
So some of the things that we've talked about how to structure your resume and how to be very intentional about a direct ask. What are the other things that you think apply to the candidate and applicant population in general, not military spouse, that you think candidates get wrong? And where is it that you think that things maybe have changed during COVID that candidates don't know about?
Yeah. So I think one of the things I've seen, and I try to understand this on both ends, right? We've all been candidates. We've all interviewed for jobs. It's a hard process. Being on the talent side, we also see that constantly, every talent department is constantly overwhelmed, understaffed, just, pretty much like every department everywhere. There's always more work to be done than hours to do it in. But I've seen a lot of kind of really harsh posts on LinkedIn recently, berating recruiters for sending an automated email that had a mistake in it, or, not getting back to candidates. We really try to make sure we get back to candidates as quickly as we can, whether we're moving them forward or we have to reject them for a position. There are absolutely times where we make mistakes. Something falls through the cracks, or we're waiting on a hiring manager, or we're waiting on permission to make an offer, or you're negotiating with a candidate and it's taking longer than you expected. So you're not able to send final rejection emails until that's completed. And I understand from the candidate perspective, it can be really frustrating. And there are definitely recruiters out there who ghost candidates, which is not okay. But also understand that on the other side of that experience is usually a very hardworking recruiter, a very hardworking talent professional who's trying to juggle multiple positions, hundreds of candidates, if not thousands of candidates. And they're usually not intentionally giving you a bad experience. But also, don't be afraid to call it out in a professional way. I've actually had candidates who've moved forward in the process because they've really politely given me feedback on something we could have done better. And it's happened after we've rejected them. And for some candidates, it's happened kind of mid-process. And it shows a level of professionalism, but it also shows that you're a problem solver. So I've had candidates say, this is the email I received. I don't think this is correct. Or, asking for specifics or giving even feedback on how the process could have gone better. And it shows that you're not just a complainer that's going to post something on LinkedIn to broadcast to the world that you received an automated email that didn't have your name spelled correctly. Like, I'm really sorry that happens sometimes, but you can really make yourself stand out as a candidate if you professionally approach the recruiter or the talent person in an individual way and giving them genuine feedback. And maybe it could even lead to a position that you wouldn't have otherwise received.
Well, I just think, especially with a mental health and wellness type company, you would definitely not want to kind of gaslight the company in social media if you wanted to work for them.
Right. I would hope in any industry, it's not really best case scenario, but I understand it's a hard process. People get frustrated, and sometimes that frustration ends up on social media.
So I think something else too that we should explain. I don't think I've learned that candidates don't necessarily know how the process works. So first of all, a company has to get a requisition approved, meaning this is what the job is. This is, kind of what we're going to pay, whatever. And then it goes out.
Yeah.
When it goes out, it can go out a myriad of different places. Some are more effective than others. Those all have to kind of be collated inside a system, which is usually an applicant tracking system, or sometimes people use databases. There's all kinds of different ways that the recruiters will do this. Yeah. And then they start picking, and then they start send out emails, making phone calls. If you do not respond to your email, And if you do not answer your phone, then you keep moving down the list that you have shortlisted, correct?
Correct. And I would say one really important thing, if you are applying for jobs, check your spam and junk, because most of our emails are coming from an automated system. That doesn't mean we're not personally writing them, but they're coming through going through a system so that we can track them and know who we've contacted and who we haven't. Most of the times that means they get flagged as spam because your email thinks it's just, a mass email that's coming from any other company.
Yep. So now you've hoped that you've reached them. Okay. Yeah. So now you've had a phone call with someone and you've said, hey, I'm very interested in, it's maybe like a 15-minute, it's just an initial phone screening call. Mm-hmm. Then you set up an interview. I think, let me skip over a step here that I think is really important. This is part of the way we've learned recruiters change a little bit. Yeah. So sometimes this initial short list will get sent to the hiring manager first. Sometimes it doesn't. It depends on the company and the role and all kinds of nuances.
Yeah.
But you mentioned it earlier when you said, the hiring manager may not have gotten back to us. So explain in more detail what that means from the candidate's perspective, because I think this is where recruiters end up taking a lot of friction from candidates when really it's still sitting in the hiring manager side and the candidate doesn't know that.
Right. Absolutely. So each process is a little bit different, but most of the time, so for us, I'll do all the scheduling for a candidate, but once I've scheduled the candidate, say with a hiring manager, they maybe have that interview with the hiring manager. I then have to meet with the hiring manager for them to decide if they're moving that candidate forward. Is that the end of the process? Are we waiting for other candidates now? Because that hiring manager wants to interview more before they make a final decision. Are there changes to the job that have happened mid-process? That happens frequently. Business needs change. Sometimes, you initially had permission for 2 roles and now the company believes it really should only be 1 role, but that means the skill set's changed a little bit. We now need somebody who has experience in Excel or customer service or whatever it might be tied into the other requirements of this role. And so there's a myriad of reasons why a lot of times the recruiter is waiting for a decision from the hiring manager, a decision from leadership above the hiring manager. And I do try to make sure I'm at least making a touch point, but don't be afraid as a candidate to reach out and say, again, thanks so much for the time to interview. I thought I would hear by this week. I just want to make sure I hadn't missed an email or a phone call. There's,
so how long should they wait? Give some parameters on that.
Yeah. So I always try to give a timeline in my interview so that they have an idea. And then based on that timeline, always completely appropriate to reach out if you haven't heard by then. If not, absolutely by a week. If you had an interview and you haven't heard anything a week later, it doesn't hurt anybody to reach out. I usually say though, do it via email. I've gotten some phone calls late at night. I think most of us use our cell phones for like multiple purposes. Yep. We no longer have office phones that stay at the office. And if you call at 9 p.m., nobody's there to hear it. So I've definitely gotten some, late phone calls because we're in different time zones, or the person thought it was just going to be a voicemail and they want to leave. So send an email. It's usually easier. It's also easier for me to flag and respond to when I do get that response a day or 2 later, if I'm waiting for something from the hiring manager or for someone else.
So do you think it's appropriate if you're on your first call with someone, it's just kind of like an initial phone screening, for the candidate to say, can you give me some insight into the process or some insight into what are the next steps? Do you think that's okay to ask?
Absolutely. And even, it's appropriate to ask, do you have a timeline for the entire process, or do you have the entire interview process laid out? I, try to be very forthcoming and share that even when it's not asked. But if it's not asked, absolutely an appropriate question. And if there's still some uncertainty, I also try to be clear about that we, after this step, it'll be a video interview with the hiring manager. There may be a 3rd interview, but we haven't made a final determination on that. And I'll just be clear if we haven't made that final decision.
So we've had something come up in, I want to say in the last 2 months, a couple of conversations that we've had with recruiters. And I was surprised and not surprised at the same time by what they said. They were discussing receiving thank you notes from the candidates. And they said in both cases, it was two different recruiters, two total different industries, one enterprise, one a startup. And they both said the same thing. They're like, I will not forget that candidate. It really made an impression on me. They ended up both getting offers, even though they probably weren't 100% the top candidate. They were good. Mm-hmm. But it showed like an empathetic and professional touch that they didn't see from anyone else.
Yes, absolutely. Not only follow up with a thank you note, but use that as an opportunity if you felt like you didn't answer a question well. So we had an experience with one of our providers. We have a really unique process for our physical health providers because we are a telemedicine company. We do it's a short phone screen. It's a video interview with our chief medical officer. And then the final step is actually a mock visit. And they do it with one of my children because we're a telemedicine company. And one of the most unique things about our hiring process is we have to make sure we're hiring providers who can engage children through video. Yep. So we've had some tremendous pediatricians, nurse practitioners, PAs who just weren't comfortable in a virtual environment. And that's totally fine. They just, wouldn't be a great fit here at Hazel because that's how we operate. And so we had a provider do that mock visit. You could tell she was visibly very nervous during the mock visit. And she sent a thank you note afterwards to myself and our chief medical officer and explained that, that she was nervous, gave a couple kind of reasons for it, but also accentuated her excitement for the role and actually explained that, the interview process made her nervous and that she didn't feel that she would have those same nerves when she was seeing children for Hazel. We ended up giving her a job offer. And that was one of the tipping points. It was that self-awareness that yes, I noticed this. I was definitely nervous. I forgot to do these things that I normally would have done in a visit.
Yep.
And I truly believe that the level of care I would provide to Hazel moving forward would be better than what I showcased in that part of the interview. Phenomenal. Self-aware, showed that intentionality of reaching out afterwards with not only a thank you note, but also adding some information that ultimately led us to make her a job offer.
Yeah, and a level of professionalism that you want to be exhibited when they're working with your schools. Yeah. That's the other part I think candidates need to remember is regardless of if it's remote or in person, it doesn't matter if it's entry level, C-suite. When you are hired, you now are part of the face of that company. Mm-hmm. And it's so important. It's part of the reason why I believe so strongly in diversity, because you can see yourself as a customer or a consumer of a company. You can see yourself in some companies because they represent everyone. They're so diverse. Doesn't matter who you are. You're like, there I am. They're my type of company. Mm-hmm. And then others you look at and you're like, you're not me at all. Like, I don't feel like we're aligned. I'm not even interested in working for you. And even if I were to take a job, I probably wouldn't stay because I'd wait for the next time a company offered me a job that I did feel like I was really going to belong inside.
Yeah, absolutely. And that goes for us. That goes both for our candidates and having that internal experience of belonging. But also when we talk about diversity at Hazel and the intentionality we put behind it, we are really looking to mirror our student population. And so specifically when we're talking about provider hiring, when we enter a new district or we enter a new state, one of the first things I ask for are the demographics of that district, because we believe very strongly, and research shows that healthcare that is delivered by providers who come from similar backgrounds, ethnicity, language, is provided at a higher level for the patient in terms of patient outcomes. And so we do not try to hire just for diversity's sake, but we
Yeah.
truly try to hire to ensure that the students in our schools and in our districts will receive care from adults and from providers who look like them, speak like them, and truly understand healthcare as it relates to their culture and their background. And so it's a really important part of our hiring at Hazel. And because of the focus that we've had on it, over 70% of our providers identify as providers of color, and over 40% speak at least one additional language, so that we're able to provide first language care whenever possible.
That is so critical, because those nuances, this is going to sound like a funny comparison, but it's very real. So I lived in England for 4 years. And this morning I was talking to someone from England, in fact, and we were she had lived in the US for a couple of years. I had lived in the UK for 4 years. So we were talking about how we both thought we were going to go to the other country, and it was going to be, the accent is different. The cars are a little bit different, and there's trains. Like that's kind of what I thought about the UK. And then I lived there. I was like, no, there's a complete different culture and a complete different way that they talk about medicine and medical care and what their expectations are. I mean, totally different.
Yep.
And then when I came back after that experience, it really opened up my own mind. And then I started talking to, in particular, a group that we work with called the Technology Association of Georgia. So they're in Atlanta, but it's basically 1,000 tech companies that are all anchored in Georgia. And that's, kind of they all are members of this organization. So when I started talking to them, and they said, care in Atlanta is different. Medical care is different than it is in other parts of Georgia. And then it's very different than it is in Texas and Tennessee. And, and so then they started explaining the differences. And so much of it was when people seek care, how they seek care, how they kind of raise their hand and say, I need help. Totally different from a cultural perspective. These are Americans. We all speak the same language, but it's down to that population, and that community just has nuances to it that if their healthcare is not met by an organization like yours, it's largely because of those things. It's not because the doctor didn't know what to do. It's because they didn't understand what the patient was saying.
Absolutely. And so much of it has to do with the confidence of, and many times it's the parents or the guardians for us of the student, and their confidence in engaging with the healthcare system. So we had a visit recently. One of our physician who's fluent in Vietnamese, she was having a home visit with one of our students, and she could see that the parent was kind of in the background, kind of hovering, watching, but not engaging whatsoever. So she began the visit in English, and then the student was asking questions to her father in Vietnamese. So our physician began speaking in Vietnamese and having the visit in Vietnamese. The father immediately came over closer, began engaging and talking to the provider himself, and she was able to get that background. Not only was the parent now truly engaged in the visit and able to participate in the healthcare of his daughter as any parent wants to, but now our provider was able to get that full background of, the history, the medical history she wasn't actually getting a full picture of, and have the visit in the best possible experience for not only the student, but her father. And so I think that just shows why, first language care is so important. And it's not always the first language when we're talking about pediatric care. It's not always first language for the child, but first language for the family.
Yeah. It's just those kind of nuances, especially when you're talking about medical care. I mean, this is whether a person's going to be healthy or not, so it's kind of huge. I don't think that we ever, unless we really take two steps back and say, this is why diversity matters. Like it's not ticking some boxes, and it's not because someone said that we need to hit some number because someone said that our stock will go up if we do. I mean, that's not the point of it. And I just think your example, if a person can't understand that example, then I don't know what else we could really say to them, but it translates across retail. It translates across finance. It doesn't matter what aspect of the business world you're in.
It really doesn't. And I love that you said it's so much more than checking boxes. There's a story I love to tell, very personal, about one of our children. So as you know, we have a large family.
Yep.
My husband and I have 6 children. And one of our children has a chronic condition. So he sees doctors regularly. And being a military family, we move every couple of years, of course. So always getting him set up with a new doctor's office when we move. Well, when we were in North Carolina, which is the last place we were stationed, I made him an appointment with his new doctor. We went in the visit. Our son was 8 at the time. We're sitting in the room waiting for the provider to come in, and in walks a tall Black man with dreads, big smile on his face, and he comes over and he gives our son a big handshake. Well, our son is an 8-year-old Black boy, and his face just lit up. And so they had this great visit, talked about football and school, his favorite class, all these things. We're walking out to the car, and my son looks up to me and he goes, "Mommy, I might be a doctor someday." And I go, "Yeah, buddy, of course, you could be anything you want to be." And I took one more step and I stopped, and it hit me. He'd never said that before.
Yeah.
But our son had also never had a Black male as part of his care team. He had had white males, he had Black women. This male happened to actually be a nurse. Our son didn't know that. He was in scrubs and he was taking care of him.
Right.
So in our son's mind, that didn't matter. To him, that was all he needed to see that someday he could be a doctor.
Right.
He saw himself finally as a provider instead of just the patient.
Yeah.
So when it comes to, like you said, diversity is so much more than just making sure everybody has an opportunity to, to interview and have a job or to check a box. It is, for us as a healthcare company, providing the very best experience for every student and every family in the way that they are most comfortable interacting with a healthcare system. But that translates to customer service, that translates to, so many other industries of giving every consumer, every patient, every client the experience that is most comfortable for them.
Yeah. That is such a great story to explain why people need to see themselves in the businesses that they do work with. It doesn't matter what it is. And I think that C-suite of companies have caught on. I don't think they truly understand exactly what you just said, though, that by having that person who would be viewed as diverse and, in most cases in the US, and take care of your son, it changes your son's perspective on what his, he doesn't have limits now. His potential has changed completely.
Exactly. And that's why, efforts for things like women in tech are important. And, all these, it's not just to say that we're doing them or to, you have to see it to be it. We've heard that quote a lot, and you don't realize how important that is until you experience it yourself or you see it through the eyes of your child. But it's absolutely true. And, so when companies talk about diversity and they implement diversity, efforts, I think they just really need to dig deep and understand, why is this important? Like you said, why is this important? How does this actually impact the experience that our end users will have? And make sure that it's deeper than just simply having a page on your website that says that, diversity matters, and, going on with doing things the way you always have.
So true. So before we wrap up, I want you to tell me, what is Hazel Health looking for as far as the type of people? Do you have open jobs right now? And if you do, how do people reach out and see if they can apply?
Absolutely. So we are hiring. We have quite a few roles across the board. I lead all of our, as I mentioned, clinical talent and delivery. And so everything from physical health providers, mental health providers, case managers, clinical support, licensing, that's all kind of under my purview. And we're hiring right now strongly in our mental health team. From the corporate side, we are hiring engineers, tech support, customer success. We are hiring within our marketing department, within our people department, and we are a remote first company. So we do have some roles that have kind of regional requirements. So customer support in Florida, or, account management in Florida may require you to be located there. But most of our roles are truly 100% remote. Many do not even have time zone restrictions. And so that's one really exciting thing about, I think, working for Hazel. But all of our open roles are on our website. They're also on LinkedIn. And if you see something that you like and you want to apply for, send me a message and let me know what job you applied for, and I will absolutely pass your name on.
Okay, that's awesome. Well, because I know that we see a lot of people reaching out specifically to us, looking for remote work, but also looking for companies that really embrace diversity. And sometimes they're not considered diverse, whatever that means. They are just like, I just want to be in that type of company. I want to be in a company that has the same core values as I do.
Right.
And I really appreciate you joining and just kind of pulling the curtain back and helping candidates learn how to get through this process. I think that they want to do it. I think they're willing to do it. But it seems like there's some secret decoder that they need. And that's one of the things that we're trying to reveal for them, is to say, these are the tips and these are from the experts, and not just experts, but experts at companies that are really good companies that they would want to work for.
Absolutely. They say applying for jobs is a job itself, but it's a job that nobody's really usually trained for. So
that's exactly right.
Have these conversations.
Michelle, give us the URL for your website.
We're hazel.co, and it's not com, it's .co.
Okay. So hazel.co. That's it. Okay. So it's not Hazel Health. Okay.
Nope. It's just hazel.co.
Okay. Very important. All right. So hazel.co.
Yep.
You go in there, there's a careers page. Is it up at the top or is it at the bottom?
It is. It's up at the top. And we actually have a page for both corporate and clinical careers. So if you're, specifically interested in clinical, we have those broken down on a separate page. We include quite a bit about our benefits, our work culture, and just different aspects of kind of the company. You can see, if you're a clinician, you can see bios of some of our other providers, see their incredible backgrounds and kind of why they chose Hazel, why they choose to stay at Hazel. So there's a lot on there. Our marketing team did a big revamp on our website just a couple of months ago, and I think it's pretty awesome. So
very good. That's always an exciting moment when you get the revamp. Yes.
So there's a lot of information there now that wasn't before, and I think it's, from a candidate perspective, there's a lot there to learn, and a lot of questions can probably be answered right there on the website.
Amazing. Well, Michelle Turner, thank you so much. I love seeing the pictures of your beautiful family.
Oh, thank you.
You have some great athletes in her family. Some very smart kids too. Like it's quite the combination.
It keeps us busy. That's for sure.
Yes, I don't know how you do it, honestly. And then I love seeing your posts. Keep them up and continue to kind of give the advice to the world of recruiting and saying, hey, this is some good policies to follow, because I think everyone can grow better, grow faster with good advice from people like you.
Absolutely. And I appreciate you shining a light on such